I remember when I first started teaching thinking, I wish I had a specific thing to say. What is it about dance what is it that's my style, my technique, not Martha Graham's, not Gloria Newman's, not Merce Cunningham's, but what is it that I can bring to the dance that's really uniquely me? What do I believe in it? And it's taken me years and years to come to the place where it all has come together. And it has to do with the human spirit, I think, and coming back to the being, the self that needs to come out, that can come out and that needs to come out, I think, and not just dancers, but for everyone.
Join me for a conversation with June Watanabe, choreographer and modern dancer. I'm Bettina Gray. In 1941, when June Watanabe was 3 years old, the United States government forced her family to relocate from their home in Los Angeles to a Japanese internment camp in Wyoming. "40 years later, she was able to address this emotional experience through the artistic expression of choreography and dance. After raising 3 children and recovering from a debilitating back injury, she founded her own dance company at the age of 40. Her innovative work, which incorporates movement, music, stage design, and video, is deeply influenced by her Japanese-American heritage. Today, at age 51, she is considered by colleagues and critics to be one of the Bay Area's most dynamic performers and valued teachers. On the dance faculty at Mills College in Oakland, she continues to share her unique vision with new generations of dancers. You started dancing again after family at a time when everyone said, this can't happen. What got you going?
I think when someone begins dancing at the age of 40, it's because you have to do it. And it was almost a new discovery at that time for me. And it's amazing that it took me 40 years to realize how much I love dance. And
well, you were teaching dance.
I was teaching dance, but I was not performing. And it's one thing to teach and to give in that way. And it's another thing to really be participating in it yourself. But I thought it was enough just, teaching, and until I ruptured I had an injury and I ruptured 3 discs. And it was at that moment when I was crawling on my hands and knees, I think for the first time in my life, I realized how dearly I loved movement.
When you were crawling on your hands and knees?
Yeah.
From the ruptured discs?
Yes. And I couldn't walk, and it was not even a matter of walking again. All I knew was that I had to dance. And even if it were to be just for one more time.
What did it take to recover from your back injury?
Will.
Will.
Just sheer will and determination, because of I had to dance again. I didn't want to walk again. I just had to dance again. I didn't want to go through surgery, so because this was a time when I was just acknowledging the fact that I really did want to go back and dance and begin creating work. So because of that, I didn't want to go through any surgery, so I went to Canada to get an injection of chymopapine, which was very common practice in Canada, but not allowed in the United States. And so I dissolved 2 of my discs, and coming back, I had to go through physical therapy, and my back was in a great deal of trauma. I began dancing, and I shouldn't have dance then. I was told at that time, you really need like a good 9 years to get over an injury like this, or, at least 3. But I kept thinking I was running out of time because of my age, and I thought I have to hurry up and do this because in 1980, I was just beginning my career when all this happened, and then somehow I kept getting the feeling that it was going to come to an end unless I would hurry up and do this. So I started taking class, and I was in pain for a good 2 years, and but it was as though time was running out, and I had to do it then. So I pushed very hard to strengthen my body, and so I could dance again. And I think the thing that may have helped me was when I was in the hospital, I took 3 of my dance tapes with me, and I'd play them every night. And tearfully, I'd go through the dance, internally and visualize the dance.
Dance tapes of yourself dancing?
Oh, no, audio tapes, music. I would play the music and go through the dance internally as I heard the music, and it was the only thing that gave me strength, I think, to, get on and recover. I just had one goal.
It was worth it.
I'm so glad I experienced it in a sense, because all that did was it confirmed how deeply I love dance and how important it was in my life. And I don't know that had I always participated in it all those years, I would just, it would have just been another part of my life as another appendage. And I think it was very important that I felt that pain and that I felt that kind of commitment. And it's funny about life that that these moments of tragedy or despair or whatever we go through, those moments are really, really critical in terms of our personal growth. And if we can just get through those moments knowing that there's light, on the other side.
What is this love of motion?
I don't know. Well, as a child, the thing I really, truly loved before I ever danced was music. And that's how I started dancing, was because I wanted to take piano lessons, and I loved music so much. And my mother took me to a neighborhood studio where they taught dance and, music. And this man, Mr. O'Reilly, I still remember him with his white hair and his navy blue suit. He said, well, why don't you dance instead of taking piano lessons? And I don't know what prompted him to, say that. And I had not even ever thought about dancing. And so somehow we ended up dancing. And I never got back to my piano lessons.
I've heard so many women talk about being subjected to ballet lessons as children and come away feeling awkward and ugly instead of whole.
Some of the most beautiful moments I've seen people dance are the untrained dancers. If they can feel a conviction about how they're moving, it is so beautiful because it's unlearned. And it was like the unlearned piece of choreography that we watched in my elementary class. It was so organically expressive, but there was form and structure to it. But it was unlearned. It was that raw, natural state of being that had a form and a definition, but it wasn't learned. I love to encourage people to experience this feeling of movement, because I do feel such joy. At times I keep saying, now June, listen, you're at this age, you should dance like someone of your age, but I do feel such an exuberance in terms of movement.
How does one dance like someone your age? What does that mean?
Well, I know. It's this predisposition about what one should be like when you get to a certain age, I suppose. And part of, I think I say this because my choreographic works tend to be heavier. They come from a very much of a deep place. So I think in terms of the movement material, it's wonderful to experience that kind of exuberance. It doesn't quite come out in my work, because I think the materials in which I dance about are not necessarily about these wonderful feelings about life. I remember when I first started teaching thinking, I wish I had a specific thing to say. What is it about dance that, what is it that's my style, my technique, not Martha Graham's, not Gloria Newman's, not Merce Cunningham's, but what is it that I can bring to the dance that's really uniquely me? What do I believe in it? And it's taken me years and years to come to the place where it all has come together. And it has to do with the human spirit, I think, and coming back to the being, the self that needs to come out, that can come out and that needs to come out, I think, and not just dancers, but for everyone.
One of your dances is about your experience in the Japanese internment camps.
That took almost 9 years to finally come to a place where I felt it truly was speaking in the way in which I would like it to speak. It's funny that as in 1979, when I did my first piece of choreography, I did a piece called ... Silently, and it had to do with the silent scream, and I thought, now why am I doing this? Didn't know. And subsequently after the first solo I created, I kept thinking about images of searchlights, barbed wire fence, and a watchtower, and I thought, now why do images like that keep coming up for me?
They were just coming to you, you weren't consciously working on this.
No, it was just from doing that first solo that I then began having images of in a wartime situation, and I thought I'd never been in a war, so I couldn't imagine why this was all coming up. And I realized as I began working on my very first group piece that this probably had to do with the internment, and it's something that we've never spoken about at home. All the years that I've grown up, in Los Angeles, my family would never discuss it. It was just something that was not openly discussed. And when it came time that I really wanted to address and really dig into the past, I asked my mother if she would, talk about it. She said, "There's nothing to talk about. What was done because it had to be done, and that was probably the way it should have been," which is very Japanese in the sense that we live by these words, shikataganai, which means it can't be helped, and gaman means, just grit your teeth and withstand whatever needs to happen. And I suppose those two elements prevailed in terms of their attitude, so that we grew up without ever really knowing about it. And in some ways, I don't know if that was good or bad, because they tried to make life as cheerful and as normal as possible, while we were in camp.
How old were you?
I went in when I was 3 and came out about 6. So I just have images and not too many feelings. I had some very good times in camp. They're wonderful times, in the snow, and I remember going to the movies on Fridays and living somewhat of a normal life. But I think the problem with all this is that because it was never discussed, I think you always knew that there was a feeling of apprehension, there was tension there, and I think it's almost more damaging when you don't know what is going on, as a child. And so I suppose a lot of this just sort of came up, perhaps, through my first dance that I created. Because my pieces come from such a personal place, I think, oh my goodness, I really shouldn't be dancing about this, because it is coming from a personal place. But I hope that my dances are of a make a universal statement, and I think that I'm finding that from the response I am getting, that people are being reached, and that the works become a vehicle for themselves to tap into themselves and perhaps other experiences in life. And if anything, that the dance is a vehicle to speak about issues. And someone had talked about my internment, had just seen my internment piece, and said, you know, it's one thing to know about it and read about it in history books and read the papers, but she says, you know, and seeing the work just brought her so much more closer to the reality of what really happened. And regardless of what form it takes, it's very important that through the arts, that in various ways, that things get communicated.
And here's a body unsilenced.
Yes.
It's such power. You spent 17 years rearing your children, in some way silenced, self-imposed silenced, but then spoke out again.
Yeah, I think I feel so grateful. I do feel very grateful that I was able to find my dance, because I didn't know how much I loved it.
Yeah.
and I just feel very, very grateful and privileged that at my age now, and in 1990, that I can be not just dancing, but also creating work that had to come out of me. But truly, that creative spirit must be cultivated. I think that's important for the survival of humanity.
Imagination.
Imagination, feelings, intuition. And somehow we really need to build that into our educational system.
How?
It's through perhaps getting back to motherhood, because this is where we're raising our next generation.
I'm interested in the time you spent rearing your children and what it was like for you. Do you regret taking away from your growth as a creative artist?
No.
Or was it a taking away?
No, it wasn't taking away, because well, first of all, I literally was not involved in it, that intensively. But I never felt as though something had been taken away. And I know this is true of some of my friends who had really were very immersed in the work, and suddenly they had to, divide their time with family and children. And but for me, it was just something I was going to do. I had never planned to dance or have a company. So I just knew that this was the next step in life, which was to go and have a family and eventually, become teacher. The teaching has always been very strong in my connections with dance, more so than in actually performing or choreographing act.
Did you ever get the impression that people felt you were lost to the world because you chose to have children instead of dance?
No. It's funny because when I mentioned to some friends that I was so surprised that I ended up dancing again, they said, we're not surprised. And I have a feeling that people perhaps thought that I would always be connected with it in some ways. And actually, I did not really ever give it up. Although I was not performing myself or really dancing, I would attend concerts, and as I think back, my mind was always in the world of dance, or in the world of art or theater. And so, in a way, giving it up physically doesn't mean that you give it up. It's still there if it's inside of you. And I guess it has to do with this thing where my son once said to me, "Mom, I don't think you'll ever really be lonely." And I said, "Why do you say that, Colin?" And he says, "Because you always seem to be thinking about something." And he says, "How can you be lonely when there's something going on inside of you all the time?" Hopefully through the arts, I think the arts is certainly one way of speaking out, of tapping into individuals so that they can tap into themselves, into their own lives, and to find some kind of spirit that they can bring out of themselves. We seem to be in a time where there's great spiritual need. And I feel very grateful that it's been through the arts that, through dance, that I've been able to not just speak for myself, but through my teaching, it's just been very, very inspiring that of getting people to a place where they can tap their inner self. Everyone needs something spiritual to keep them going, and it doesn't. The mind needs release, needs to be replenished, and either through nature or whatever. Yeah, I think people need to know how to find other ways of replenishing their spirit, and it's something we don't think about that in terms of as part of education. But that's an important part of education. It's called survival.
Basic
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
You dance, you said, about the human spirit, but in specific, one of your dances seems to be about feminine spirit. The kimonos?
Yes. That came from a piece called Heian, and Heian was a medieval period, in Japan, during which time women wore layers and layers and layers of kimono, and they were also always hiding behind the kimono and behind screens. They were not to be seen or heard. That period greatly reflects some of the turmoils we go through in our culture, in our society, about roles and expectations. And somehow that the layers of kimono symbolize the bondage which we feel, which we perhaps could have, well, I grew up I was a product of the 60s or the 50s, and so that I grew up with this image that I was just going to simply give my life to becoming wife and mother and a teacher. And I sort of thought about that in terms of the bondage that I was feeling with the layers of kimono. And also part of it had to do with my own heritage of being Japanese, in the sense I'm sure I was never allowed to speak out and not encouraged to speak out and express my ideas. And so that kimono symbolized a kind of a bondage that came from either culture or one's heritage. Very often we almost sometimes have to go back to our heritage in a way that perhaps is not quite right for us, but to discover and find what that place is, and then to find how that can fit into who we are at this given time and place. Or it was like my trying to go back to the No dance, and I studied the No work at one point. The No dance is called the Shimai, and the Shimai and the Utai, which is the singing, comes from the No drama, and those are plays it's a very old classical form of theater in Japan, and it's very much based on sort of a Zen Buddhist thought of beauty in life coming through a very formalized form of movement and song. And it tells stories about some mythological stories and some tales about life in Japan. The style is very austere, it's very inner, and it's very slow moving.
Did that affect you in your form?
This is something I did go back to study, and but it wasn't because I was interested in it as an art form. I was interested in it because it's something that my father had done, and that it was something that I had shunned as a child. And it was really somehow because of him that I needed to go and study the dance. It wasn't just to study it as an art form, but that became a way of perhaps my connecting with him and something that he loved. So I studied that. And what I feel now is that he also wrote haiku. He was a very artistic, very gentle, but a very spiritual man. And I think this was my way of connecting with him. And I feel that the work I do now, I don't do the No dance, but I think it's found its way into my work. And I feel very often that I feel the spirit, in my work.
Dance has the reputation of being one of the most disciplined of performance arts, though. And you're talking about freedom and breaking away, but yet
Some of your students say that it's hard to work
Yes,
with
it
June.
is. I expect a great deal, because I expect a great deal of myself, but yes, you only get to freedom through discipline.
You get to freedom
Through discipline. And that discipline is very important, but it's not this kind of, whiplashing discipline. I think we so often think of discipline as being of that nature. And I think about the discipline that comes from this inner concentration. And it has to do with, it's this Japanese word, gaman, or shikarishite, which means, you be strong. But being strong, it takes a certain amount of focus and attention to what it is you're doing. And I've said to students that you don't work for improving, or you don't work for fixing things. You work on doing it so that becomes your center source of concentration is in the way in which you do what it is you're being asked to do. And through that, things get very shaped, defined, and change begins to take place. But the discipline has to do with being able to concentrate. And it has to do with a hunger. There has to be a hunger for wanting to know more, wanting to discover, being awed by new discoveries of exploring. And that's what makes discipline possible, because we do go through a great deal of pain.
But to be aware, to struggle with it consciously.
I really see art as being transformational, as a way of carrying somebody to another place, of discovering, of understanding, coming to a new understanding, of projecting on into a place that we haven't been.
Healing?
Very healing, yes. And people have, and this has just been wonderful. Very often I don't get good reviews, and the critics have probably given up on me, and I probably just don't quite fit into, their taste. But when audiences, and I get very depressed and thinking, oh, Joan, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. But when audience members have come back and said that it was a very healing experience, I know that some parts of it are working, and that if it can do that, then perhaps there's worth to the work one does.
This has been a conversation with June Watanabe. I'm Bettina Gray.